In our dreams, we have always flown. But it is only in the last 200 years that we have been able to move through the air and see the earth from above. For many, the oldest way of flying is still the best, the one that allows the most intimate view of the land. For when men first flew, it was in a hot air balloon. Other flyers may look for speed, but a balloonist looks instead for a favorable light wind and a landscape beneath him that offers both variety and excitement. In the wilds of South America, one man set out to fly his balloons over some of the most challenging landscapes to be found anywhere on Earth. In the process, he rediscovered his country. When we hear the phrase, "the lost world," we think of the landscape of Arthur Conan Doyle's fiction. This area of southeastern Venezuela with its great rivers and waterfalls, its unexplored jungle, and its high, mysterious plateaus. But to many Venezuelans, the phrase, "the lost world," might well apply to the entire country. It has one of the richest landscapes in South America. But the natural wonders of Venezuela are largely undiscovered by outsiders, even today. It is partly to remedy this that an expedition assembles at a small jungle airstrip in Canaima, in the remote highlands. It is led by a Venezuelan businessman and adventurer, Jorge Délano.
Usually when they ask me where I'm from, I say I'm from Venezuela. I say, well, what part of Africa is that? I say, no, it's not Africa. It's South America.
Whoa! This is a big one.
Let me grab one of these.
Délano has come to the final stages of an expedition that has been a year in the planning. At this gateway to a Venezuelan national park, he and his crew unload the unlikely components of two balloon systems. Just upriver is one of the natural wonders of the world, a geological feature that many Venezuelans might consider a symbol of the wild beauty of their country, although few have seen it in person. Angel Falls. Délano first saw it as a young man.
My uncle took me with his family to see this mighty waterfall. It's very difficult to see it out of the small windows of a low-flying DC-3. And it took in my mind that one day I could do this, in a different way.
Délano's idea is simple but daring. He wants to fly his balloons up the face of Angel Falls. This would be the first time that balloons had flown in his country, and Délano could not have picked a spot that presented more logistical problems. The first task is to get his crew and gear close enough to the base of the falls to make an attempt. The normal route to the falls is up the river by small boat, at best a one-day trip that involves at least 2 portages. For where he wants to go and what he wants to do, only a helicopter will work. The first hop is a short flight to a staging area where the expedition members from different countries meet each other and where they first experience the unpredictable and frustrating weather of the rainforest.
The way this weather was moving in, we decided to take people out instead. Everything just was absolutely black in there. There's no way of getting through the canyon. So
Brian Boland, one of Délano's flight instructors from the United States, will be the senior pilot on this expedition.
If it gets dead calm this afternoon, we can do a flight here, which would be good.
Brian and Kathy Wadsworth, his partner from the United States, begin to test inflate the balloons. Kathy will fly one of these balloons in the flight up the face of the falls.
A balloon is a very simple flying system. A nylon envelope, a propane burner system for heating the air inside the envelope, and a basket. That's it. But the propane in Venezuela, for example, isn't as pure as the gas we're used to using in the United States. And we didn't know how that would affect the balloon's performance. The only way to find out was to put them up and fly them.
A number of the crew members had never even seen a balloon in their lives. It seemed very important to show them what these balloons were made out of, how the equipment went together, give everybody a sort of a training exercise in what these things were about.
This landscape owes its existence to the rivers. They have been the grinding tools that have shaped and cut down through an overlying shield of ancient rock to form this flat jungle plain punctuated by vast, sheer-sided mountain blocks. Elsewhere, they might be called plateaus or mesas, but the Venezuelans have adopted the Indian name for them, tepuys. Over the next few days, the expedition continues its reconnaissance flights around the Canaima area, as the gear is moved 30 miles closer to the base of the falls by dugout canoe. Finally, the weather breaks long enough for the crews to be lifted into the base of the falls by helicopter.
The plan was to use the helicopters, our ferrying aircraft. We got some people in, we got the equipment in. Our plan was to have probably half the group in there and then ferry the other half of the group, and there's one extra balloon.
How many miles do you say from the falls? I don't think we're going to hit the falls anyway.
We're lucky if we're a mile from the falls laterally.
On foot, the pilots slog through the jungle at the base of the falls for their first close look. In the shadow of the falls, drenched by its spray, they realize how powerful it really is.
Looking at an elevation that's running a mile high, 5,500 feet to the top, 3,212 foot initial vertical drop. We've got a number of thousand feet from there to here. That's all happening in a distance of about a mile. If it's not listed as one of the wonders of the world, it should be. You know, is that 400 feet tall or close to a mile? You know?
It makes you really...
You know, in that book that Charles Brewer put together.
Rudy Trufino, or Jungle Rudy as he is universally known, is the expedition's guide. He has lived near the falls for 30 years, and the pilots are counting on his first-hand knowledge of the area. Over the years, piece by piece, Rudy has brought in all the supplies to construct a simple shelter near the falls. And here, by the Corral River, the expedition sets up its base camp.
So if it rises so much here, then it rises nearly the double over there on the island.
There is a vacant spot in one of the balloon baskets, and the pilots now offer it to Jungle Rudy.
Brian suggested, and I think it's a great idea of having Rudy come up with us.
Well, I'll go. I'm a sport on that one. I know the way down.
Right. Notice that was one of the very first things I asked you about 4 days ago.
I know the way down also.
You said, well, not knowing the way, one could get very, very lost heading out the back end.
Brian is not only being generous. If the expedition runs into trouble during the flight or after the landing on top of the plateau, only Rudy knows the area well enough to guide them to safety. Any waterfall draws the eye and the stomach down and out into the void. But most world-class waterfalls are broad streams, powerful fans of water like Niagara or Victoria. Angel Falls is different. It is a single plume of water, a river that leaps into space from the lip of the Auyantempuy and falls as mist 3,200 feet below on the jungle and rocks. There are stupefying amounts of water flowing over and through these blocks of sandstone, a supply that is replenished daily by torrents of rainfall. Unfortunately, the same forces that created the mesa and fuel the falls are precisely those downpours that make it difficult for the expedition to depend on the weather in this area. A launch site has been optimistically established on a dry sandbar in the middle of the river. But one morning, Brian and the pilots awake to find their launch site seriously awash.
This out here used to be high and dry. This is our takeoff site, which is completely kaput now. If in the next hour we get conditions running perfect for flying, and the launch site's still buried under this water, we can't go.
The chopper lifted us up onto the top of the tepuy, and we tested the wind direction with some small helium balloons. On his way back, the pilot flew us along the course of the river that feeds the falls. 1 minute, the ground right underneath us was rushing by at 100 miles an hour. Just then, as we shot past the lip of the falls, the ground dropped away, and everything was suddenly still. Over 3,000 feet below, we could see the same river, now a small silver ribbon in the jungle. Until this moment, with our hearts in our throats, none of us had quite realized how high the falls actually were.
That night in camp, they review their plans with Rudy. All week, the weather has been sodden, the wind skittish. Down here at the bottom of a 5,000-foot canyon, the only certainty has been the uncertainty of the weather. At this time of year, the rains might continue for weeks. The expedition's supplies and patience are running out. They will have to fly tomorrow or give up.
If we take off here, I think we're gonna move this way, and then perhaps a little up this way.
Okay, that's what we've been counting on.
Here we should come in those flat savannas with the tiny little hills and so on.
Right.
But here are some spots you can get in, about 2 or 3. But then you run into another mountain again, a high mountain.
So if we get that far, or if something puts us up here, it makes a lot more sense to actually head back towards the main camp.
Early the next morning, the sky overhead is finally clear. In a burst of energy born of the long week of waiting, the crews scramble to get the balloons up.
7:20 for both balloons. The time now is 7:19.
Fortunately, when we took off with Kathy and I in the 77, she was the balloon we called Angel. I mean, we went the wrong way right away.
We're off! We're off!
All right.
Keep burning, Kat.
The weather's so unpredictable, it's so changeable in these tropical, forests that you don't know what's going to happen.
Where is the first balloon?
Beautiful from up here.
Going something either through here or out there. Yeah. We took off and we went due east, which was the one direction we never thought we'd travel in. There was a chance for a little while that we'd have never turned and headed towards the falls.
To see Angel Falls from a balloon is just fantastic. It's just a fantastic experience.
Delano has seen the falls dozens of times before, but always from safely inside an airplane or helicopter. Now, exposed in the balloon basket, it is as if he is seeing them for the first time. Brian found himself living the experience through Rudy Trufino's eyes.
It was a tremendous honor, and it was very exciting being able to offer passage in a vehicle to the falls and up and over the top that Rudy had never experienced before. We were not encumbered by windows as you would have in an airplane or a helicopter. We were able to get ourselves up along the face of the fall and get to the top. Which is the better direction? Up onto the top of here, or where they're going?
That would be the best.
That would be the best. Right.
In the other balloon, Kathy and George are concerned as they feel the wind currents blowing them away from the falls and toward a sheer, threatening wall of rock.
We had planned to take off together, but sometimes I think Brian finds an excuse to hang back so he can watch how I do in unknown conditions. Jorge and I were almost out of the canyon before we found a favorable wind direction.
She went good and high real quick and just kept going east. We went nice and slow, and at 6,200 feet, we found a current that slowly, just ever so slowly, turned us towards the falls themselves. I see a nice little plateau right there, Rudy. See?
Yeah, perfect.
Altitude?
6,200.
62, and we're climbing 700 feet a minute. Yep, this is the altitude we want to hold, 62 to 6,600, something in there.
Yeah.
I think we're going to be able to do a nice stand-up landing. When we do land, we bounce a little bit, Rudy. Okay, flex your knees and hold on to the side. Watch your head on the propane tank. I want to be real low and just skimming this rock here as we come in. And up we go again. Going beyond the crevasse. Here we go. To the other side of it. Are we okay?
Yeah, okay.
Hang on.
Yeah, that was
A little windier than I thought.
okay now.
Hold tight.
Hang on.
Hold tight and watch your...
Okay.
Watch your neck. Hang on. What's the boat? Hang on. Get a little more. Pretty wet. But we are down. Nice thing about having two balloons flying was that she saw that we were creeping towards a little. She brought herself down a bit towards that altitude and then turned and sort of headed in with us.
Perfect landing, perfect landing. All right, you did it.
Délano is an optimist, but this flight had succeeded beyond his sunniest dreams. Whatever had driven him to learn to fly balloons was now replaced by the complex emotions of having seen his balloons aloft against one of the most spectacular landscapes the Earth has to offer. There is joy in seeing and there is joy in doing, and this flight had provided both in a powerful combination. Délano was hooked.
I thought immediately of doing some other flights because there's so many other beautiful places that you can fly in Venezuela.
Délano had flown his balloons where no one ever had before, and he had a taste of what it took to mount a wilderness flying expedition. Now he took a critical look at a map of his country to try to find other remote sites that would be equally challenging. Rainforest, river delta, coral islands, coastal desert, central plains, and mountains. In western Venezuela, the Andes begin their long sweep south down the spine of the continent. From the foothills a year later, near the provincial capital of Mérida, Délano mounts his second flying expedition. Venezuela's highest peaks, the 5 White Eagles, are clustered together here, and Délano wants to fly over them.
I'd never flown in such mountains before, and I'd certainly never considered flying in anything approaching this altitude. The cable car was certainly the only way to get the gear up here, but we were losing precious time at each station.
Time is critical. If the balloonists can inflate and launch their balloons today, they will be able to escape the gruesome effects of spending more than a few hours at high altitude.
So late in the day already?
Normally about 10:30 in the morning, the clouds come in. Yesterday when we headed up this way in the airplane at about 10:15, there was a very thin wall of cloud that came through. If we get something like that again, there's no problem. We can actually do the flight today. So we've got a helium tank aboard, and we're going to send off some helium balloons and take some wind readings aloft. Right now, from what we see down here, it's calm enough and stable enough that we would be able to inflate.
The problem was the altitude. Up above, on the windswept summits of the White Eagles, oxygen would be thin, and the longer the expedition stayed up high, the worse they would be affected by the exertion of launching the balloons.
Well, it'd be good to have the helicopter come up and try its thing out, you know, before that stuff comes in. Yeah, you should radio down, have the helicopter come up and do a spin, a reconnaissance.
Radio. We need the radio, and then
you know, just have it come up, have them do their circling thing, and go back. But in other words, for them to find out that they can fly up here.
You go to 20,000.
How high is he?
He's about 15 right now.
The helicopter can fly here, but it is at the limits of its operating specs. The expedition cannot hope for rescue by air if something goes wrong during the first part of the flight. So Délano has engaged a local Andean rescue team to accompany the expedition. Now, as the crew begins moving the cumbersome equipment down a scree slope to the launch site, only these climbers are unaffected by the altitude.
Sigan subiendo, muchachos, sigan subiendo. Bueno, vamos
The wind has come up, and a bank of clouds begins moving in from the east. There will be no flying today, and the last cable car has left. The crew will have to remain on this summit until tomorrow morning. By that afternoon, the food supplies haven't been touched. Except for the climbers, everyone is sick.
It's quite an abnormal thing to be hanging out this long at such a high altitude. You start suffering from altitude sickness. Some of the gang feels like throwing up. Some already have.
Headache, nausea, shortness of breath. Altitude sickness makes you look back with fondness on the worst hangover you've ever had. The difference is that a hangover gradually gets better. Délano is affected too, but he knows he is holding the spirit of the expedition together.
Well, the idea was to stay as close as possible to the takeoff point of balloons. And the first idea was to stay down at the 2 stations down and come up early morning. But there's too many people who could decide against that, and we decided that once and for all to stay up here. Of course, affecting the people is not too good. We're all suffering from the altitude, I guess. But we expect tomorrow to be really good. So all this aggravation and suffering will pay for it. I hope so.
I have a very dull headache, and I hope that's all I have by the morning. Nothing more. But I can still function if I go slow.
If the weather doesn't clear tomorrow, this will be the closest the crews will get to Pico Bolivar, Venezuela's highest mountain. Its beauty is cold consolation to the expedition huddled inside the unheated cable car station. The temperature is dropping below freezing, and the crews face a long, anxious night. By morning, no one has slept. The skies are clear, but unfortunately the wind is blowing in the wrong direction, over the width of the Cordillera and toward the east.
It's about 30 miles flying in that direction to the first landing site. It's about 7.5 going this way. So, needless to say, you want to go the short route. What you wouldn't want to do is be 2 hours into the flight and still over the backbone of the mountain.
Conditions are not ideal, and a prudent balloonist would wait for a better wind. But no one has the stomach to spend another day on this summit, and no one has the heart to give up. It seems as if the only way to get these balloons off the mountain is to fly them off. Like sleepwalkers, the crews prepare to launch.
Hang on. Let me hook them on, okay? What time do you have right now? Huh?
Okay. 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock? I think we can be airborne at 8.
No, ya que te
8:40.
8:40.
8:40, we're ready
César,
to leave the ground. Okay?
¿Cuál?
A las 8:40.
Dos lo necesito.
You want to put your slave in this place and take the master?
Ambos. O sea que se mantiene.
You still follow that white load tape. Load tape leche. Yeah. Sweet. Good.
A balloon envelope is made of material that is both tough and light, but it is not designed to be deployed over a field of sharp rocks. Here, there is no choice. Dwarfed by the scale of the peaks, the balloons slowly take shape in the high mountain air, their bright fabric like the tents of a wayward circus. In this bleak landscape, only they and their crews seem to be alive.
Just don't let the bottom come up. We keep it down, okay? Hands on the basket.
For half an hour, the balloons are buffeted by the odd winds, and they tack back and forth above the spine of the Andes without making any progress toward their goal. Brian decides to burn his way to a higher altitude, but Kathy, in her smaller balloon, is having problems.
My pyrometer was well into the red when Jorge and I noticed that one of the fabric panels at the top of the balloon had a strange appearance. It looked as if it might be about to turn into liquid from the intense heat. I backed off on the burners, and we suddenly found ourselves in a downdraft.
They can't tell you? I could see Kathy heading down. It was during an awkward time for us. We ourselves were having repeated flameouts at the altitude we were at. We were pushing approximately 20,200 feet at that point. It seemed she was at about 18,000 feet. A very rapid descent had begun.
Luckily, Kathy is headed toward the only possible landing site for 100 square miles, a steep slope on the edge of an impossible ravine. After an hour's flight, she is only a few thousand feet from where she had started, and still within sight of the cable car station. Finally, Brian has found his wind and is headed away from the peaks.
When we land, I need access to this, too.
With only 15 minutes of fuel remaining in his tanks, he will have to settle for the first likely landing spot he comes across.
I might let it drop real hard so we land here and not up to go.
They are dropping out of the sky at 1,500 feet every minute.
Ready, set, and one bounce, coming up, and we're going right up to the road. Okay.
That is nice. This tree can hold
The
us.
Guacamaya.
That tree can hold us to the road. Thank you.
Okay, you okay?
Hold it. We're going down.
Now.
Can we get off?
What we're going to do is one at a time. We're going to get out. We're going to walk this up the hillside here, leave the basket on the trail, and we're going to deflate up the
Coming
hill.
out.
We can retrieve everything with the helicopter later.
Okay.
Everyone okay?
Yeah, everybody okay?
Yeah. It was to our advantage to do it here rather than try and navigate down the valley with the little fuel we had. There's no problem. This is a great place compared to where we could have landed. We were getting very low on fuel, flying at over 20,000 feet. The consumption is outrageous. But top of that, the wind direction was coming back up the mountainside, so there was no getting any closer to Merida than we are right now.
Here in the valley on a 60-degree slope, Brian's crew has come back to a bemused reception from the local farmers. Like barnstorming pilots, they offer jokingly to share the experience. Would you like to ride in a balloon?
¿Usted se montaría con nosotros en el globo?
Back in the mountains, Jorge and Kathy have been rescued from the mountainside one at a time by helicopter, and the crew begins the arduous job of manhandling the balloon gear back up to the cable car station. For Délano and Kathy, personal disappointment at not having made it over the Cordillera is outweighed by Brian's successful flight and by the fact that all the pilots are down safely. A balloon is a paradoxical aircraft, strong but delicate, and the demands that Délano was placing on his two flying machines meant that they had to be inspected more often than usual.
Just like a helicopter or an airplane pilot, a balloonist wants to look over his aircraft thoroughly after each flight. The difference is that there are no hidden surprises. If something is wrong, you'll see it right away. There's not much that can go wrong with a hot air balloon. The nylon envelope is attached by steel cables to a burner system capable of pumping out millions of BTUs, and then to a tough wicker basket. After the scare we had had above the Andes, we wanted to be sure that our balloons hadn't been ruined by the strains that we'd put upon them.
Lots of birds, lots of wild animals. Africa all over again, huh?
Délano had flown in the jungle and the mountains, both of them difficult expeditions over unforgiving terrain. But one characteristic area of his country offered the kind of balloon flying that any pilot would love: the Llanos, the great central plains of Venezuela. Délano finally has a chance to fly. With flocks of scarlet ibis wheeling below him and the horizon clear in every direction, he skims above the palms in a mild wind.
Amazing flight, eh? It's an incredible way to see the country. My fuel is okay. Let's go to Brazil. Not quite.
Off the northern coast of Venezuela, 500 miles from the Llanos, lies the archipelago of Los Roques, a Venezuelan national park. Within the arms of a barrier reef, 135 islands and islets are scattered in the Caribbean. Délano wants to fly here next, but the daily winds are strong and unrelenting, even at dawn. And so he searches for a ship that can run with the wind and launch the balloons from her deck. The Guamache, an old oily LST, is engaged, and on the island, Délano watches with some impatience as his gear arrives. The landing is not an auspicious example of seamanship. Délano is worried, and while the boat is unloaded, he has a conversation with the captain. This fellow is new to the crew, the ship, and the treacherous waters around Los Roques, and he has some misgivings about his role in the expedition. Unfortunately, the captain and his ship are essential. Délano wants to inflate his balloons on the wide open deck of the Guamache as she is steaming full speed through the islands, hoping to use the ship's forward motion to neutralize the effect of the wind. Délano hopes he can depend on them.
It looked like there was a real good chance we were going to end up landing in the drink, Rather than just go and do that blind, it seemed to me to be very important that we get ourselves coordinated as far as a retrieve and rescue effort. So we decided to inflate the small balloon for a test flight.
There weren't really enough people to hold the balloon down against the wind, and Brian and Jorge took off across the island with the half-inflated balloon acting as a huge sail. Brian later called this a running launch, but that was maybe too dignified a name. What it really was a race to see if we could get the balloon up before we ran out of island. We lost.
The helicopter plucks the crew out of the water easily enough, but the balloon envelope sinks quickly and is soon enfolding tons of water beneath the surface. The crew and bystanders haul it ashore, but they have overlooked some coral beds just beneath the surface. The sharp points of the coral slice into the fabric like knives. One balloon is now hopelessly ruined for this expedition.
Oh my God, what a mess. Well, there's a real incentive for landing on land.
The coral just ripped holes in it as they were dragging it through the water. So it's like shredded wheat. So we won't be able to use it for...
The more hands we have on it, the less chance there'll be of it ripping.
Por la línea blanca. No soy egoísta. Mira, llévenme.
Like the pause between a scrimmage and the real game, that night's dinner is full of spirited argument about how to handle the next morning's flight from shipboard. The pilots know now that they cannot afford another water landing.
What we try to do is come in with several boats on the sides and just start piling the fabric in. No helicopter retrieve.
He could pick up the basket.
Not one people for the other.
But not until the fabric is out of the water.
Right.
Because if he blows that balloon around, it'll be
See, if we detach the basket, it'll float.
Okay.
You know, the way it was here. In fact, it'll float a little better without
the balloon.
Just after dark, the second balloon was taken out to the ship, and it's been offloaded on the ship, and we've got the one larger balloon to do the ship launch with tomorrow. The plan is that 4 people and 4 fuel cylinders will go in the larger balloon.
The next morning, before sunrise, the Guamache begins to steam into position for her downwind run between the islands.
Well, the captain didn't know the area very well, so we finally got a pilot from the area. The captain didn't really trust him very much anyway. He didn't trust anybody, not even himself. He said to me, well, the moment I see anything, I'm going to turn, go against the wind, and that would have been, a tremendous disaster for us. The ship was so slow that we had to bribe the guy at the engine room to really make those engines go, because the left engine was almost out.
The direction's good, yeah. We're not in a bad position. I think we got a choice of about 4 islands out there that we might run into. lot of water. A lot of water, right, between them, beyond them. But we're not 100% sure yet we're going to get it off the deck of this thing.
The deck was clean, but still had a lot of obstructions that could rip the balloon. We didn't have much of a way of correcting any maneuvers that would take us into the wind. I was very worried. That's why I stayed with the captain until the last minute to make sure that he was not going to give any orders to change the course.
Really get it going. Let out.
The wind is still insistent, and there is no room to maneuver on deck. As the balloon takes shape and engulfs the ship, there is no turning back. They could not deflate the balloon now, even if they wanted.
The launch was perfect, and we were all thrilled and happy to be flying. Jorge hadn't been smiling up there on the bridge of that ship, but now he couldn't stop. I was sorry that we had lost the smaller balloon, but this was reward enough.
We headed off towards this island, which looked about 8 or 9 miles away, and it felt great. The speed was constant. We were probably blowing along at about 15, 16 miles an hour. We stayed low to the water. That entire 8-mile distance was spent on my part rehearsing what we were going to do once we got there. In other words, what we were going to do for the landing. As we got closer and could see what this upcoming island was looking like, and there was no incentive to fly beyond it because we didn't see much in the way of other islands out there, but it was looking very narrow. It was quite wide, or long I should say, but there was a very strong possibility that as we came in, the balloon would traverse more than the, say, 100 yards width that this island had to offer us.
From above, it is even clearer how narrow these islands are. The deflated balloon stretches nearly a third of the way across the narrow spit on which Brian has landed. Ballooning is an early morning sport, and by 8:30 the crew members are back on their base island with a day to kill. By lunchtime, sentiment begins to run in favor of trying another flight that afternoon.
We had all been seduced by the success of the morning's flight, and we all wanted to fly again. By the time we'd lifted off, the sun was already flat on the horizon.
You can control a balloon's altitude, but you can't steer it from side to side. They have no way of tacking over to one of the islands they are passing.
Sure glad I brought my sunglasses.
We're going down fast.
Brian now tries to skew the balloon's flight path with a bold maneuver. He puts the basket down in the sea for a long moment.
The balloon flies well at night, but our problem was our landing targets were becoming invisible. There was a lot of water out there, not too many islands in the direction we ended up heading in, and we couldn't see them.
That's a good sign.
We're going to try and land on that one. If we can't, we're going to the next one out there.
If the balloonists are in danger, so too are the chase crews. The helicopter is flying at risk in the dark, and the chase boats below are racing over shallow water, their outboards screaming to keep up.
I radio on the handheld radio I had and talked to the pilot and said, try to find down there someplace a piece of land or an island big enough so we can make an approach and land. So that's what he did. He went up in total darkness, but he was very afraid of hitting us because he didn't see us. We just had the seconds of light when the burner was turned on by Brian. So finally, when he got his very powerful searchlight on, we saw a big island with lots of rock, trees on it.
I might let it drop real hard.
Brian puts down hard on the beach, and then feels the balloon bounding up and forward into the trees. The basket catches, and the pilots jump up and down until it settles into a swamp 90 feet below. They are down. When they walk out of the swamp onto the beach, with the helicopter light blinking in the darkness, the pilots have dazed grins on their faces, but their eyes are wide open, like people reborn. The next morning, the pilots can see how close they had come to missing the island altogether. What is left is the wet, hot job of retrieving the balloon from the trees, and the more pleasant task of planning the next flight.
Before we could fly again, both balloons needed substantial repairs. No one had been injured on these flights, but the flights were sure hard on the balloon envelopes. Fortunately for Délano, both Brian and I are certified repairmen, as well as pilots. It took us days at the sewing machines before we could repair the damage done by the swamp trees and the sharp coral.
By now, Délano and his balloons were becoming well known in Venezuela, but not because other pilots had joined him in the air. His were still the only hot air balloons flying in his country. But fame brings strange requests. A rancher wondered if Délano would bring his balloons to the Orinoco Delta to help him round up a wayward herd of water buffalo who had escaped from their enclosure. Délano obliges, only to discover, not surprisingly, that his helicopter is a more precise instrument for this purpose than his balloons. Délano was not one to lose an opportunity to fly, this time in the calm, milky skies of the delta of Venezuela's largest river.
Tell him to let it up a little bit. Ease it up.
If the flight itself was peaceful, landing near a farm village introduced the pilots to a kind of excitement that they had never before experienced in South America.
By contrast to the flights we have in the States, where we're seeing spectators all the time when we come in and land, up till this flight, the flights we've had in Venezuela have been spectatorless. We've been in such remote areas that we've seen nobody except our own designated crew people. I get as much of a kick out of the reactions of people on the ground, people whose feet we land at, yards we land in, is flying the balloon myself. I think that's what keeps us all up there and still flying. Yeah, buenos dias! Yeah!
These flights in the Delta were fun, but they were practice for a more serious expedition Délano has in mind. He is going to return to the lost world, that remote landscape of jungle and plateau. But this time he is planning a flight that will push his men and equipment to their limits. In 1964, bush pilot Harry Gibson was flying over a wild, unmapped plateau deep in the Venezuelan jungle near the Brazilian border. He looked out over his wing struts and through an opening in the mist saw below him the great holes of Sari-Sariñama. There are holes in the earth that are deeper and depressions that are wider, but nothing in the world is as deep and broad as the largest of these chasms. It is from the depths of this hole that Délano wants to fly. All the expedition's supplies and crew have to be flown by small plane into a staging area near the base of the plateau. Here, a small community of Maquiritare Indians has carved out a living from the jungle. The men are absent on a month-long hunt for tapir and woodland deer, and the women tend small plots of yucca from which they make cakes of cassava, the staple food of 1 million square miles of South American forest.
We're short two very important pieces of equipment. That's the baskets. They were too large to get in the Islander, which was a small plane that came in and landed here. So we got a DC-3 coming in, which is too large to land here. In fact, the last DC-3 that tried to land here is crashed over in the river up over here. So they're going to come in at about 1,500 feet and parachute the two baskets out the door.
In a sudden rainstorm, the flying team assembles. It has been a year since many of the team members have seen each other, and it has taken Délano all of that time to organize this expedition. The first task is to establish the expedition's base camp on top of the mountain. Like the area around Angel Falls, the landscape here was shaped by water, great torrents of it, falling as rain every day, cutting down through the hard rock of the Guiana Shield to isolate these plateaus. Running through the porous sandstone of the remaining mountains, the water is squeezed from the flanks of the rock as waterfalls. The mysterious holes were once great underground caverns whose roofs have collapsed. One is a shallow trench running off the edge of the plateau. The other two are as neatly carved as if they had been scooped out of a green lawn with a spade. The largest of the holes, called Brewer's Hole after the Venezuelan naturalist who first explored it, is 1,000 feet deep and 1,000 feet wide. The expedition is fortunate enough to have found a campsite next to a small stream, and now Délano is eager to make a reconnaissance flight to the bottom of the hole. The helicopter cannot land at the bottom, so Kathy and Jorge will fly in, suspended inside a rope birdcage. They pretend to be nonchalant, but Kathy's expression as they descend into the hole reveals a woman with her mind wonderfully focused.
Down here, the air was oppressive and still. I felt as if we were disturbing some kind of equilibrium. The floor of the hole was rough. Great hunks of rock were stacked against each other. We took 2 steps forward and 3 steps down.
Before Délano's visit, only 12 men had stood at the bottom of this hole. When they had looked up, they had seen, as Délano and Kathy now did, one of the rarest sights on Earth, a perfect circle of sky held within the irregular rock walls.
Okay, over she comes.
Because only one balloon can fly from the floor of the hole, a second launch site will have to be cleared on top, along the rim.
We want to fire this up.
Brian positions the basket and tests the burners for this second balloon. At camp along the Blackwater stream, the crew is exhausted from a day of clearing the launch sites and moving the balloons into position. Everyone has now seen the hole from the bottom or the rim, and in the back of their minds are the potential difficulties of launching the 2 balloons successfully. Most of these men have been with Délano on his earlier expeditions, and they know how much tomorrow's flight means to him.
Buenos días. Hay que levantarse, Enrique. Luz María. ¿Quiénes más están aquí de este lado?
Good morning.
Roddy. Time to wake up. Wake up, everybody. Jorge.
Pedro, buenos días.
Francisco, buenos días. Creo que estoy haciendo un aguaje.
Once the gear, the equipment, and everybody was in place to make the flight, then, of course, we had to rely on the experience of Brian and Kathy to get us out of the hole and to get us flying into the Sarañama area.
The plan calls for Délano and Brian to inflate the smaller balloon here in the depths of the hole. They will have to unroll the 80-foot envelope over the rough, uneven surface and keep it from being torn as it fills with air.
Watch this. Yeah. Got it.
Okay, I'm going.
Up on the rim, Kathy will inflate the expedition's larger aircraft from her clearing. They plan to join each other in the air.
What time is it? 20 up? Hold tight, hold it. Hold it on there, just hold it on. Looking good. We got it. Just keep it there. Okay, the basket's got to come vertical a little bit. That's it. Just a bit. And down the hill with it. Okay. So to slide forward.
Okay, ahora paramos la canasta.
Okay, down the hill. Okay, now we're going to have Ray move. 9. Empuja, Ramón, para abajo. Más abajo, Ramón, más abajo. Watch your feet. Oh,
Cuidado. Mamá, te quita la pierna, chico, no jodas.
Beautiful.
Okay.
What time you have?
Brian's inflation goes surprisingly well. Within minutes, he has the balloon upright on the slippery, moss-covered rocks of the hole.
How's the other balloon doing?
We don't know. We lost contact.
This cable you need to hold.
Kathy, however, is having problems up top. The wind has shifted and is now blowing across the axis of her launching site. With a smaller crew, she has to manhandle the balloon against the wind.
Jorge and I had the balloon inflated and standing at the bottom of the hole for a half hour. During that half hour, the sun was rising enough that it was baking the far side of the wall of the sinkhole. The side opposite was in shadow, and we had a tremendous amount of turbulence that started to develop. It had been a very calm environment 30 minutes ago when we inflated, but in fact now it's becoming very dangerous.
Finally, Délano and Brian decide to launch. They hope they have not waited too long. Halfway to the top, the balloon begins to rotate. They are now in the grip of the turbulence that has developed as the sun heats the rock chamber unevenly. They are headed for the jagged wall, but there is nothing to do but hang on.
Get down, slow, just slow. We may have enough heat to bounce out the top. Just stay low. We got it.
There's a big hole.
No, there isn't. Well, there is. How big?
The balloon is torn, but the wound is not a mortal one. Shouting with relief, Brian and Délano clear the rim of the hole and are free, finally, from what seemed like its deadly embrace.
Wow. Well, let me tell you, it was something.
Yeah, we got a hole, but it's not awful.
No, not too bad.
We didn't have much time to celebrate. When we bounced off the wall, luckily the inertia did carry us up and out of the hole itself, but we immediately lost the vertical lift that we were getting from this column of hot air that was pushing up out of the hole. In hesitating, we found ourselves immediately going into a rapid descent. It was burning like mad, and with the downdraft we were forced down into the trees, and this time we knew the balloon was torn for good.
The hopes of the expedition now fasten on Kathy. She has finally gotten her balloon inflated, and slowly she rises into the air, thinking she is joining Brian in flight.
Can you do anything with him?
As soon as I cleared the trees, I could see Brian's balloon plastered all over the treetops right in my flight path, less than a mile ahead. Why had he put down? I didn't have long to think about it. Suddenly, I was being forced lower by a fierce downdraft.
Kathy is being hit by the same perverse wind that grounded Brian. But there is another problem. Kathy has a film cameraman slung outboard in a harness seat, and his control line snags. Like a human anchor, he brings the great balloon to a halt.
Wait, Rod!
You'll hurt yourself! Wait a minute! He's on a limb.
Are you in a limb?
Yeah.
Kathy cuts him free, but as her balloon begins to rise again, she sees that she is heading for the edge of the tepuy. Quickly, she reviews her situation. She is exhausted from wrestling her balloon aloft against the wind. She has already been driven once into the trees. She has had to abandon her cameraman, and now the edge of the plateau is approaching. She has had enough. Prudently, she decides to end her flight. Délano has come a long way from his initial innocent flight up Angel Falls, and he has experienced enough now to appreciate how much he has accomplished. This expedition has been a bittersweet success. Despite his momentary disappointment at the tantalizingly short flights, Délano knows what he has had to overcome in order to launch and fly a balloon from the depths of the Great Hole. On these expeditions, Délano has learned to value these hard-won moments aloft. The series of flights, almost without his knowing it, has lured him into a search among the wild glories of his country for a landscape that matched his dream. In the process, he has rediscovered what had been his patrimony all along. For the American pilots and crew, what these flights finally represented was not simply a victory over terrain and weather, over all the difficulties that earth and sky can throw up in the face of an attempt to fly where no one ever has before, but rather the discovery of a new country and a private vision that became a shared one.